Hello everyone, it's Dazzling One, and this week's discussion is on modern sightings of pterodactyls or pterosauruses. And while this might sound like a really weird thing to talk about, the inspiration comes from an article by the News Observer out of Raleigh from January 11th, 2018. It's a little old, but fairly recent, and also if you're interested in joining me on air talking about dreams for a future live stream or in talking about health and survival, then just email me at dazzling128, and the 1 and 28 are spelled out, at gmail.com, or message me. And if you go to the About section of the channel page, you'll see that the email is there, as well as all of the platforms that you can use to message me. And with that said, getting into the topic, so cryptozoologist Jonathan Whitcomb, who specializes in studying creatures like the Yeti, Bigfoot, and modern-day dinosaurs, is a self-described modern pterosaur expert, and he's a Utah-based author who circulates news and runs a website that describes encounters with prehistoric flying reptiles. And he has a collection of pterosaurus sightings, and he counts 9 out of North Carolina, including one winged beast that appeared in Raleigh the first week of January. 20-year-old Cynthia Lee, an eyewitness, described this sighting as the being having a long tail with a diamond-shaped bulb on it, and it was dark brown. Whitcomb says that there have been other sightings of pterosauruses in 33 states and in Washington, D.C., and that people who saw them emailed him and called him. Some of the sightings were out of Raleigh and Durham. However, according to the News Observer, there haven't been any photographic or forensic evidence. What's interesting about this is that in the year 2017, in the Chicago area, there were 55 reports of Mothman sightings. And there's stories out of the Southwest of the Thunderbird, and some equate these sightings of these pterodactyl, pterosaurus type beings to that of the Mothman sightings or Thunderbird or even dragons. And contrary to common thought, there's a difference between a pterosaurus and a pterodactyl. And people also falsely call a pterosaurus a dinosaur when, in fact, that's inaccurate. A pterosaurus, which means winged lizard, is in a family of large flying reptiles, which include the pterodactyl and the pterodon. The modern scientific community rejects any recent sightings of pterosauruses or pterodactyls and say that these creatures went extinct over 66 million years ago and lived between the Mesozoic to late Jurassic period to the end of the Cretaceous, or 228 to 66 million years ago. And they are known to be the earliest vertebrates to have evolved the power of flight. So when we look at American history, at least, on sightings of winged dinosaur or winged reptile-like beings. And this list is coming from the Thought Code. If you're interested in reading some of this for yourself, I'll have the links to it in the description box. But the first comes out of New York State on May 1961. A businessman was flying his private plane over the Hudson River Valley, and he claimed he heard a buzz by a large flying creature, and he looked and he saw a pterodactyl. In the early 1960s, out of California, a couple was driving through Trinity National Forest and saw the silhouette of a giant bird. They estimated it to have a wingspan of 14 feet, and later described it as resembling a pterodactyl. In January of 1976, out of Harling, Texas, teens Jackie Davis and Tracy Lawson reported seeing a bird on the ground that stood 5 feet tall and was dark in color with a bald head and a face like a 6-inch long beak. A subsequent investigation by their parents uncovered tracks that had 3 toes and were 8 inches across. In February of 1976, out of San Antonio, Texas, 3 elementary school teachers saw what they described as a pterodactyl swooping low over their cars as they drove. They described it as having a wingspan between 15 and 20 feet. One of the teachers commented that it glided through the air on huge, bony wings like a bat. In September of 1982, out of Los Fresnos, Texas, an ambulance driver by the name of James Thompson was stopped while driving on Highway 100 by a sighting of a large bird-like object flying low over the area. He described it as black or grayish with a rough texture but no feathers. It had a 5 to 6 foot wingspan and a hump on the back of its head, and almost no neck at all. After consulting some books to identify the creature, he decided it most looked like a pterosaur. So while I shared some more recent examples coming out of the 20th century of pterodactyl pterosaur sightings in the United States, some other recent examples, but coming out of other regions like Africa. In 1923 in Zambia, Frank H. Mellon collected reports from natives of an aggressive flying reptile they called Kongomodo, which means overwhelmer of boats. The natives, who were occasionally tormented by these creatures, described them as being featherless with smooth skin, having a beak full of teeth, and a wingspan between 4 and 7 feet. When shown illustrations of the pterosaurs, Mellon reported the natives identified them as most resembling Kongomodo. In 1925, a native man was allegedly attacked by a creature that he identified as a pterosaur. This occurred near a swamp in Rhodesia, where the man suffered a large wound in his chest that he said was caused by a monster's long beak. And in the late 1980s, cryptozoologist Roy Mackal led an expedition into Namibia from which he had heard reports of a prehistoric-looking creature with a wingspan up to 30 feet. So I just find all of this very interesting. It could simply be hoaxes, it could be urban legends, and nothing more, but given that last year I did a video on winged humanoid sightings as well as Mothman, it is very interesting. And I do believe that there is a spiritual component to some creatures that are in the cryptozoology family, but I also believe that there probably are just creatures out there that aren't classified by modern biologists and they don't fit neatly into modern taxonomy. And the thing that's interesting about all of this as well is it kind of goes along with the idea of the stories of Agartha or Hollow Earth, which I know some of you guys aren't big fans of, or it could be a case like what happened in the book and the movies, the Jurassic Park, where you have scientists who are bringing back prehistoric life. And this wouldn't be too much of a stretch to me, because when I think about a story that came out a few years back about how scientists wanted to try to bring back, I believe it was a mammoth, there are ways that they could collect the frozen cells or cells from certain fossils. I'm not an expert or a biologist in that regard, but I do think it's interesting, and I always kind of entertain this kind of conspiracy theory, science fiction idea that there could be islands or regions set up out there where these creatures dwell, kind of like Kong Skull Island, and they're kept far away. We don't know about these creatures, and every now and then they escape and make it here to the mainland. I mean, how these creatures would survive and go under our nose in America would be beyond me, but I do believe that there are things out there that are not necessarily what we think of as normal animals, but aren't necessarily spirits, but they have a body of their own. But those are just my thoughts on this all. But I'd like to know what you guys think about all of this. Do you believe these sightings are hoaxes? Do you think that there is a possibility that we have some dinosaurs still flying around in parts of the world, or that these are creatures brought back through modern methods of splicing and genetics? Or do you have some other alternative theory to all of this? But I hope that you guys enjoyed this video and that you have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you either on next Monday's live stream or next Wednesday's video. Take care and God bless.